Hey everybody, welcome back. Hope you had a good Thanksgiving break. We have 7 more days of school left in each of your classes until we're on winter break. On your Google Classroom page, you'll find an attendance sheet. You'll find what our daily tasks and assignments are going to be each day. You'll find what we'll be doing. You also see a schedule on there for what will be happening from here until we're done on December the 16th. We're going to do a couple units while we're in remote setting. First one is going to be drugs and toxicology. Second one is going to be about criminal profiling. So like what are the ingredients that make someone into specifically a serial killer. First one will be drugs and toxicology though, and what a forensic scientist would use from a body in the event that poison is suspected. Typically in this unit, we do have a little bit of a project, so we'll be spreading that out a little bit. Our first one is to make a wanted poster. You would have seen the rubric for it on the Google Classroom, and when you meet with me soon, we'll discuss that a little further. We'll also be making a short little video about this thing that's on your wanted poster. We'll look at a few very famous accidental deaths and non-accidental deaths as well. What else? Another thing we do in this unit is watch a video, well, a couple videos. First one is about Jim Jones. He created his own cult and took a bunch of people to South America as part of his religious cult and convinced them that they need to drink a Kool-Aid drink that he prepared, and well, everyone, well, not everyone, but nearly everyone perished from that. We'll also look at that today a little bit. Another video we typically watch is called The Poisoner's Handbook. It's based on a book called The Poisoner's Handbook. I have a copy of it, and it looks at the very beginning of how forensic scientists started to figure out who did poisonings. But before we get into that, we'll go through a few of these notes on here. We're doing numbers 1 through 8 today. This is just a little section about drugs and toxicology. Slide number 1, drugs identification and toxicology. Done. Things I think that you will achieve from this is that we'll look at 5 types of controlled substances. We'll be able to describe the role of toxins in death, how it's used to find death, and how it causes death. And we'll look at several famous cases of poisoning that may have even led to many very important events after that. A little bit about drugs and toxicology. You had 6 vocab words for one of your assignments today. Very short, you can turn that in on Google Classroom. Toxicology is just the study of poisonings and how it can be used. A lot of toxins are used for things, but they can have negative effects on the body. They can be ingested, inhaled, injected, or they can be absorbed through the skin. So there's a lot of ways that a toxin can get at you. Just depends on which type it is. Things that drug toxicity is based on, like the amount that's being exposed to, we call that a dose or dosage. If you take a prescription med, your dosage will be X amount of milligrams usually. And in the length of exposure, we call it duration. So it's how long were you exposed to this. Put that more in terms of our world today. The magic number nowadays is 15 minutes. If you're exposed to someone for 15 minutes of positive corona symptoms, you usually end up in quarantine. So that would be what the duration is. The nature of the exposure is how it got into your body, whether you ingested it, that just means you ate it, you inhaled it through your nose, it was injected into a vein or into your body, or it was absorbed through your skin. That works best with liquids. A complication can be how it interacts with other things. Lots of drugs, when mixed with things like alcohol, lead to very bigger symptoms than what you would regularly experience. A little bit more about the introduction here. Not all of them are poisonous because of just themselves, but how they are converted inside of your body. Here's an example. Methanol. During the Great Depression, when ethanol was basically banned by prohibition, people weren't allowed to have alcohol anymore, so people started to brew on their own. And a cheap thing that you could find in the house was wood from your furniture. So they would take wood, they would ferment it, and create their own alcohol. And this was wood grain alcohol, also known as methanol, which is very poisonous. So a lot of people died from mysterious poisoning at this time, and it wasn't even the regular alcohol that was doing it. There's many different types of alcohol. The main problem with methanol is its conversion. It's converted into formaldehyde, which we know is not good. It was used to be used for preserving biological specimens, but it's not used anymore. There's other things that are being used, or should be used. And formic acid. Formic acid is a one carbon type acid, and it's used, well, easiest place to find it would be in bugs. The stingers usually contain formic acid, like a bee sting or a sting or a bite from an ant. That's formic acid, and that is not really good for you or the inside of your body. How to measure exposure? It can be found in body fluids, stomach contents, skin, hair, your internal organs, the vitreous humor of the eye, that would be like the liquidy part that's inside of your eye, but it really depends on how the person was exposed. Other examples of very toxic things: heavy metals, solvents, vapors, radioactive material, dioxins, pesticides, and plant or animal toxins, such as snakes. They produce their own. These can all be toxic to humans. A specific one about heavy metals, things like lead and mercury. In the 40s in Japan, a lot of people died from what was called Minamata disease. And Minamata disease was mercury poisoning. A main part of their diet was fish and nearby plants that used mercury as catalysts in their factories would dispose of the waste into the ocean. The fish would be in the presence of that water, would gain a lot of mercury. People would eat the mercury that was in the fish, and people would die from that. That's just a couple of more examples of heavy metals. What else we got? Famous deaths. One of them is Socrates. He was poisoned. What was he poisoned by? And he wasn't. This wasn't a voluntary thing. He was told to drink this, and it was hemlock. Hemlock's poisonous. In the 1600s, poisoning became more common. It wasn't easy to identify how these people were dying. It was thought to be a way that left no traces behind. There'd be no physical marks left on the person from any type of physical assault. So a lot of these were not solved at the time. Murder by poison. Homicides. How many? Less than 1%. Not very common. But many important people in the history of the world have been killed off by poison. Here's a few examples. Heinrich Himmler, Hermann Goring. They're both were both very high-ranking members of the Nazi Party. They ingested cyanide at the collapse of the Third Reich. In the 70s, Jonestown members. It's the place led by Jim Jones, the religious cult leader. Also in the 70s, Bulgarian Georgy Markov was killed by ricin. And the way he was killed, he was stabbed with an umbrella, and the umbrella was laced with ricin at the tip. So he was killed by that. And in the 2000s, ex-spy Alexander Litvinenko, he was exposed to radiation and died either that way. These are just a few examples. There's a lot more. your task in determining how this person died. So toxicology is used in order to determine maybe how this person was killed. One of the first things they have to decide is acute or chronic poisoning. Acute symptoms happen with high doses over a short amount of time. So symptoms occur very quickly. An example would be cyanide poisoning. The opposite one is chronic poisoning, lower doses over longer periods of times. So the symptoms occur gradually, usually a little harder to detect. An example would be lead and mercury poisoning. You'd have to have a lot of lead or mercury before symptoms occur quickly. So that's why it's considered chronic poisoning. A cyanide one, very short amount of time, and most doses you'll start to see symptoms. A few accidental drug overdoses. These were people who died from accidental purposes with drugs. John Belushi, actor. Chris Farley, actor. River Phoenix, actor. Steve Clark, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, and Jimi Hendrix, all big rock stars. Steve Clark was from Def Leppard. Janis Joplin had their own band. Jim Morrison from The Doors. Jimi Hendrix had the Jimi Hendrix Experience, considered one of the greatest guitarists of all time. Um, their deaths all range, some from alcohol, some from harder drugs. It just depends on the time period usually. Drugs and crime, what number is this? Oh, this is number 9, so we're not moving on to that part today. Um, on our Google Meet, we'll chat a little bit about this. We'll also look at the wanted poster, so I can answer questions and explain that to you a little more. And then I'll give you time to work on that. We'll be meeting every day. It's not going to be for the full 90 minutes. You'll have a little lesson from me every day, and then we'll chat about that lesson via Google Meets, and we'll have a little assignment to go along with that as well. Um, I'll talk to you soon.